Joey on the Caribbean Weather Dude YouTube channel here. Now, you might recall last week I put out a story here about a young woman who was basically kidnapped by ICE agents in the United States, immigration agents, and spent 2 weeks in detention there under cruel and unusual punishment, as far as I'm concerned. I was the first one to break the story on Jasmine Mooney, and to be fair, I saw her mother's Facebook post, and I saw that it was going to get announced that it was going to be on the news that she'd done this interview, and said, this sounds legit. So I started reading the comments. I'm like, wow, this is a story. I looked for it online. It was nowhere. I was like, I'm going to get this story out. Let's support this woman, try to get her back to BC. So she has spoken out now, and I'm sorry if it's a little dark in here. I had to close the curtain because it was too bright. So she was kidnapped. She's kidnapped. I think kidnap's the proper term for it. Jasmine Mooney, wonderful-looking human being there, sitting there, obviously sad, probably traumatized. This is traumatizing stuff to go through. I mean, it will shake your whole world, your sense of reality, especially if you had certain, belief systems that were somewhat indoctrinated about the way things are and should be. So for me, this kind of stuff didn't surprise me because I was saying back in January, don't go to America anymore. You could probably end up in Guantanamo Bay. Somebody will. Somebody from Canada will. Right? I mean, one of the people they deported this last weekend, they rounded up all these guys and sent them back down to South America. One of the, saying that they're all gang members. The judges in the States stopped it, said, no, you got to send these people back. There hasn't been due process. Trump ignored it. So a constitutional violation happened there. And eventually these people who are at the helm of all these constitutional violations, justice will come to them someday. Don't worry. It's going to be dark for a while, and it might get much, much worse yet. It might get much darker yet than it is, right? Nonetheless, okay, here's Jasmine's story. Let's see what she's saying. I think her story should be heard by as many people as possible because it corroborates what we've been saying here in the channel pretty much ever since Trump took office. And if you recall, if those of you who've been following me on Facebook for a long time or have been my friend for a long time, you'll recall during the first Trump administration, I was saying things like this too, saying, you got to be careful going to America. And, if he gets in a second time, it's going to get much worse. So all those things have come to pass and come true. So there was no explanation, no warning, she says. 1 minute, I was in an immigration office talking to an officer about my work visa, which had been approved months before and allowed me, a Canadian, to work in the U.S. The next, I was told to put my hands against the wall. I was patted down like a criminal before being sent to an ICE detention center without a chance to talk to a lawyer. Jasmine grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, a small town in the northernmost part of Canada. I always knew I wanted to do something bigger with my life. I left home early and moved to Vancouver, BC, where I built a career spanning multiple industries, acting in film and television, owning bars and restaurants, flipping condos, managing Airbnbs. Very successful person. And, like I say, when you find yourself into this class of people, you have general assumptions about the way things are, and you don't expect that these things could happen to you, And Jasmine's had a big wake-up call, and she's speaking out about it, and I think this is great. I haven't read this article yet, by the way. This is like reacting as I read it. In my 30s, I found true passion working in the health and wellness industry. I was given the opportunity to launch an American brand of health tonics called Holy Water, a job that would involve moving to the U.S. I've been critical about some of this stuff, but that's not the point. We're here to talk in favor of Jasmine, not critique her business plans. Here to support a fellow Canadian that's been treated poorly by our supposed allies. I was granted my trade NAFTA work visa, which allows Canadian and Mexican citizens to work in the U.S. in a specific professional occupations on my second attempt. It goes without saying, then, that I have no criminal record. I also love the U.S. and consider myself to be a kind, hard-working person. See, this is what I'm talking about. I started working in California and traveled back and forth between Canada and the U.S. multiple times without any complications until one day, upon returning to the U.S., a border officer questioned me about my initial visa denial and subsequent visa approval. He asked why I'd gone to the San Diego border the second time to apply. I explained that was where my lawyer's offices were and that he had wanted to accompany me to ensure there were no issues. So, after a long interrogation, the officer told me it seemed shady and that my visa hadn't been properly processed. He claimed I couldn't find work for a company in the U.S. that made use of hemp, one of the beverage ingredients. He revoked my visa and told me I could still work for the company from Canada, but if I wanted to return to the U.S., I would need to reapply. I was devastated. I had just started building a life in California. I stayed in Canada for the next few months and was eventually I was offered a similar position with a different health and wellness brand. I restarted the visa process and returned to the same immigration office at the San Diego border. Since they had processed my visa before and I was familiar with it. Hours passed with many confused opinions about my case. The officer I spoke to was kind but told me due to previous issues I had, I needed to apply for my visa through the consulate. I told her I hadn't been aware I needed to apply that way, but had no problem doing that. Then she said something strange. You didn't do anything wrong. You're not in trouble. You're not a criminal. I remember thinking, why would she say that? Of course I'm not a criminal. She then told me, and this is again, so you, Jasmine, you had assumptions about the way the world is. And for a lot of us who, look at myself, I grew up, my dad went to prison. I've been homeless. I've been a drug addict. I've been beaten by cops. I've been arrested. I've been a protester. I've been a mountaineer. I've been a wildland firefighter. I've seen a lot of dark stuff. I've been a first aider. I've been a municipal firefighter. I've done help save people's lives on the highway as a first aider. When I worked in Vancouver for the Safe Injection Site and for Portland Hotel Society, I seen the dark side of everything, right? So I have a much more cynical view of the world. And that's why early on I was the one saying hey, I know you think this is still the same normal it's always been. It's not the same normal it's always been. People like Jasmine, who are harmless people. I mean, this isn't a woman who's out trying to do harm in the world in any way whatsoever. That's completely obvious to me. She told me they had to send me back to Canada. That didn't concern me. I assumed I would simply book a flight home, but as I sat searching for flights, a man approached me. Come with me, he said. There was no explanation, no warning. He led me to a room, took my belongings from my hands, and ordered me to put my hands against the wall. A woman immediately began patting me down. The commands came rapid fire, one after another, too fast to process. They took my shoes and pulled out my shoelaces. What are you doing? What is happening? I asked. You are being detained. I don't understand. What does that mean? For how long? I don't know. That would be the response to nearly every question I would ask over the next 2 weeks. I don't know. This is really dark stuff. Man, this is horrific. This is what people are going through. Imagine that's you. And you could be just one of these people who you take for granted that everything's fine the way it's always been. We're friends. America's our friend. And you don't realize you're walking into a country now that's afraid of everything and anybody, that's at war with itself already and may soon be at war with the world, right? They brought me downstairs for a series of interviews and medical questions, searched my bags, and told me I had to get rid of half my belongings because I couldn't take everything with me. Take everything with me where? I asked. A woman asked me for the name of someone they could contact on my behalf. In moments like this, you realize you don't actually know anyone's phone number anymore. By some miracle, I had recently memorized my best friend Britt's number because I had been putting my grocery points on her account. I gave them her phone number. They handed me a matte and folded up sheet of aluminum foil. What's this? Your blanket. I don't understand. I was taken to a tiny freezing cement cell with bright fluorescent lights and a toilet. There were 5 other women laying on their mats with the aluminum sheets wrapped over them, looking like dead bodies. The guard locked the door behind me. For 2 days we remained in that cell, only leaving briefly for food. The lights never turned off. We never knew what time it was, and no one answered our questions. No one in the cell spoke English, so I either tried to sleep or meditate to keep from having a breakdown. Good work. I'll tell you, when I was jailed and I was held for days, you're supposed to see the judge the next day. That's not what happened to me. It's like, sorry, activists, we're going to make this as hard on you as possible. And then when you finally see a judge, we're going to wait to the last minute of the day to get you into that courtroom. It was a violation of my rights. Nonetheless, that's what I did, is I just closed my eyes and spent a lot of time breathing, taking deep breaths and just relaxing and letting go. And that's what you can do in those situations. That's how the actual idea of transcendence. That's what it is. You transcend your situation. It's not some magical, mystical fucking thing. It's like you literally have to transcend the minute you're in for your own safety or well-being or whatever. On the 3rd day, I was finally allowed to make a phone call. I called Britt and told her that I didn't understand what was happening, that no one would tell me when I was going home, and that she was my only contact. They gave me a stack of paperwork to sign and told me I was being given a 5-year ban unless I applied for re-entry through the consulate. The officer also said it didn't matter whether I signed the papers or not. It was happening regardless. I was so delirious that I just signed. Oh, you can't do that, friends. Don't just sign papers. I know they're going to hold you there longer, and they're going to pressure you, and they're going to make it, and they're going to scare you. They're going to tell you that you have to sign. You need a lawyer. That's when you say, I need to speak to a lawyer. I told them I would pay for my flight home and asked when I could leave, but there was no answer. Then they moved me to another cell, this time with no mat or blanket. I sat in the freezing floor for 2 hours. That's when I realized they were processing me into real jail, the Otay Mesa Detention Center. This is awful. I'm so sorry that she went through this. I was told to shower, given a jail uniform, fingerprinted, and interviewed. I begged for information. How long will I be here? I don't know your case, the man said. Oh, it's always past the buck. Could be days, could be weeks, but I'm telling you right now, you need to mentally prepare yourself for months. Months. I felt like I was going to throw up. I was taken to the nurse's office for a medical check. She asked what had happened to me. She had never seen a Canadian there before. When I told her my story, she grabbed my hand and said, "Do you believe in God?" Holy fuck, not anymore, I wouldn't. I told her I'd only recently found God, but now I believed in God more than anything. That'd be a deal breaker for me. Sorry, dude. You're putting me through this? This is what you allow this to happen on earth? I believe God brought you here for a reason. I know it feels like your life is in a million pieces, but you will be okay. Through this, I think you are going to find a way to help others. And this article is doing that. And good on you, Jasmine. Because, there is truth in this. There is truth in this, and you have to see yourself in this regard sometimes. And, without being a mystical person necessarily, when I tell you that I'm spiritual, this is partly what I mean, is that I'll try to find personally in my life in these moments, maybe not the positive of it, but try to look at this as an opportunity. I'm not just a person who's going to get easily defeated. And that's why I'm a great wildland firefighter. Maybe I don't do well with my daily cabin fever rantings here in the middle of March. When I'm broke and there's no snow outside, snow is covering everything here in the mountains still, and I'm just waiting for fire season to happen so I can go back to work. Sure, it's difficult, but you got to understand. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, I'm digressing. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. She asked if she could pray for me. I held her hands and wept. This is dark, though. This is dark. I felt like I'd been sent an angel. This is the push-pull. Good guys, good cop, bad cops. I was then placed in a real jail unit, 2 levels of cells surrounding a common area, just like the movies. I was put in a tiny cell alone with a bunk bed and a toilet. The best part, there were blankets. Yeah, now you're starting to understand suffering. When you're already you're being thankful for something like blankets, and good for her. This positive attitude is going to help her in the long run because this is traumatic stuff. This kind of shit will break people and turn them into alcoholics and end up killing themselves. Seriously, really, this is traumatic stuff. For the first day, I didn't leave my cell. I continued fasting, terrified that the food might make me sick. The only available water came from the tap attached to the toilet in our sink, or a sink in the common area, which neither felt safe to drink. But you can't starve yourself, and you can't go without water. You have to. It's part of your fight now. You say, "I'm a lover, not a fighter," I joked. And the guard told me no fighting. I'm a lover, not a fighter, she said. But this is part of the fighting you need to do is you need to force that disgusting food down you, I know. I asked if there's ever been a fight here. No, in this unit? No, he said. No one in this unit has a criminal record. Whoa. These aren't criminals. No one in this unit's a criminal. That's when I started meeting the other women. That's how I started hearing their stories. Okay, here we're going to go. This is going to get even more interesting. Can't you tell? This is a long article, but it's good. She's really doing a good thing by writing this article. I'm really proud of you. A lot of people would just fucking eat it or give an interview or two. The fact that she's written this well thought out article, I think, is doing what will help people. Will help people maybe avoid this by saying, I'm not going to America. I'm not spending my dollars there. I'm not going to try to work there. I'm not moving there. I don't want anything to do with the war against people that's happening there. That's when I made a decision that I would never allow myself to feel sorry for my situation again. No, you should be angry, not feel sorry. No matter how hard this was, I had to be grateful because every woman I met in there was in an even more difficult position than mine. There was 140 of us in our unit. Many women had lived and worked in the U.S. legally for years but overstayed visas, often after reapplying and being detained. They'd all been detained without warning. Yeah, big old sweep going through ICE raids. If someone was a criminal, I agree they should be taken off the streets. But not one of these women had a criminal record. And that's the problem is this mentality, if someone's a criminal, you know, I don't like to make blatant statements like that because it's so easy to say, oh, they're criminals. And then people go, oh, okay. So these women acknowledge that they shouldn't have overstayed and took responsibility for their actions. The law is wrong, though. You did nothing wrong as far as I'm concerned. Nothing morally wrong. Their frustration wasn't about being held accountable. It was about the endless bureaucratic limbo they were trapped in. The real issue was how long it took to get out of the system with no clear answers, no timeline, and no way to move forward. Once deported, many have no choice but to abandon everything they own because the cost of shipping their belongings back is too high. I met a woman who had been on a road trip with her husband. She said they had a 10-year work visa. While driving near the San Diego border, they mistakenly got into a lane leading to Mexico. They stopped and told the agent they didn't have their passports on them, expecting to be redirected. Instead, they were detained. They are both pastors. My God. I met a family of 3 who's been living in the U.S. for 11 years with work authorizations. They paid taxes and were waiting for their green cards. Every year, the mother had to go underground background checks, but this time she was told to bring in her whole family. When they arrived, they were taken into custody and told their status would be processed within the detention center. Wow. Oh, man, this is so dark. This stuff is so dark. I don't understand. And the thing is, if there's only a 1% chance this stuff happens to you, even if it was that low, it's not that low. It's much higher right now. But even if there's only a 1% chance that this would happen to you, do you want to have this experience? I won't take a 1% chance on something like that. Not especially when we're trying to, hit back at the U.S. economy. Let's not give them any money or our time. Canadians, you got to think twice about going down to this place now. And it's going to get worse. This isn't going to get better. Another woman from Canada had been living in the U.S. with her husband who was detained after a traffic stop. She admitted they overstayed the visa and accepted she would be deported, but she had been stuck in the system 6 weeks because she hadn't her passport. Who runs casual errands with their passport on them? Well, you have to in America now. One woman had a 10-year visa. When it expired, she moved back to her home country, Venezuela. She admitted she overstayed by 1 month before leaving. Later, she returned for a vacation and entered the U.S. without issue. But when she took a domestic flight from Miami to Los Angeles, she was picked up by ICE and detained. She couldn't be deported because Venezuela wasn't accepting deportees. She didn't know if she was getting out or when. There was a girl from India who'd overstayed her student visa for 3 days before heading back home. She then came back to the U.S. on a new valid visa to finish her master's degree and was handed over to ICE due to 3 days she'd overstayed. This is cruel and punitive. There were women who had been picked up off the street from outside their workplaces, from their homes. All these women told me that they had been detained for the time spans ranging from a few weeks to 10 months. One woman's daughter was outside the detention center protesting for her release. That night, the pastor invited me to a service she was holding. A girl who spoke English translated for me as the women took turns sharing their prayers for their sick parents, for the children they hadn't seen in weeks, for the loved ones they'd been torn away from. They unexpectedly asked if they could pray for me. I was new here, and they wanted to welcome me. They formed a circle around me, took my hands, and prayed. I never felt so much love, energy, and compassion from a group of strangers. Everyone was crying, hey, maybe it's a prayer, whether it does anything or not. It's an act of solidarity. It's a beautiful thing, that picture that they painted. So being strong together. At 3 a.m. the next day, I was woken in my cell. Pack your bags, you're leaving. I get to go home. The officer shrugged. I don't know where you're going. Of course, no one knows anything. I grabbed my things and went downstairs where 10 other women stood in silence, tears streaming down their faces. But these weren't happy tears. That was the moment I learned the term transferred. For many of these women, detention centers had become a twisted version of home. They had formed bonds, established routines, and found slivers of comfort in the friendships they built. Now, without warning, they were being torn apart and sent somewhere new. Watching them say goodbye, clinging to each other, it was gut-wrenching. I had no idea what was waiting for me next. Hindsight says that was probably for the best. Our next stop was Arizona. This is going to get even fucking worse, people. The San Luis Regional Detention Center. I can sense how dark this is going to get now. This is going to, and I'm so glad you got out. I'm so glad that reporter covered your story. That's probably why things move faster. I'm still disgusted that the Canadian government said, like, well, America's allowed to make its own policies. You could have said something. I hope they did. I hope somebody behind the scenes said something. The transfer process lasted 24 hours, a sleepless and grueling ordeal. This time, men were transported with us. 50 of us were cramped into a prison bus for the next 5 hours, packed together, women in the front, men in the back. We were bound in chains that wrapped tightly around our wrists, with our hands cuffed, secured to our bodies, and shackles restraining our feet, forcing every movement into a slow, clinking struggle. It's like overkill. When we arrived at our next destination, we were forced to go through the entire intake process all over again, with medical exams, fingerprinting, and pregnancy tests. They lined us up in a filthy cell, squatting over a communal toilet, holding Dixie cups of urine while the nurse dropped pregnancy tests in each of the cups. It was disgusting. We sat in a freezing cold cell for hours waiting for everyone to be processed. Across the room, one of the women suddenly spotted her husband. They had been detained and were now seeing each other for the first time in weeks. The look on her face, pure love, relief, and longing, was something I'll never forget. They were beyond exhausted. I felt like I was hallucinating. The guards tossed us each a blanket and said, find a bed. There were no pillows. The room was ice cold. One blanket wasn't enough. Around me, women lay curled into themselves, heads covered, looking like a room full of corpses. This place made me feel like this place made the last jail feel like the Four Seasons. I kept telling myself, do not let this break you. You're strong. 30 of us shared one room. We were given one styrofoam cup for water and one plastic spoon that we had to reuse for every meal. I eventually had to start trying to eat, and sure enough, I got sick. None of the uniforms fit. Everyone had men's shoes on. The towels they gave us to shower were hand towels. They wouldn't give us more blankets. The fluorescent lights shined on us 24/7. Everything felt like it was meant to break you. Nothing was explained to us. I wasn't given a phone call. We were locked in a room with no daylight, with no idea when we'd get out. I tried to stay calm as every fiber of my being raged towards panic mode. I didn't know I would tell Britt where I was, how I would tell Britt. And then, as if sent from God, one of the women showed me a tablet attached to the wall where I could send emails. I only remembered my CEO's email from memory. I typed out a message praying he would see it. He responded. Through him, I was able to connect with Britt. She told me they were working around the clock trying to get me out, but no one had any answers. The system made it next to impossible. I told her about the conditions in this new place, and that was when we decided to go to the media. She started working with a reporter and asked whether I would be able to call her so she could loop him in. The international phone account that Britt had previously tried to set up for me wasn't working. So one of the other women offered to let me use her phone account to make the call, because we're all in this together. An injury to one is an injury to all. Yes, we are all in this together. Thank you, Jasmine. You're wonderful. With nothing to do in my cell but talk, I made new friends, women who had risked everything for the chance at a better life for themselves and their families. That's the truth of it. Through them, I learned the harsh reality of seeking asylum, showing me their physical scars, explaining how they had paid smugglers $20,000 to $60,000 to reach the U.S. border, enduring brutal jungles and horrendous conditions. One woman had been offered asylum in Mexico within 2 weeks, but had been encouraged to keep going to the U.S. Now she was stuck, living in a nightmare, separated from her young children for months. She sobbed, telling me how she felt like the worst mother in the world. Many of these women were highly educated and spoke multiple languages, yet they were advised to pretend they didn't speak English because it would supposedly increase their chances of asylum. Some believe they are being used as examples, as warning to others to try not to come. That's exactly it. Women were starting to panic in this new facility, and knowing I was most likely the first person to get out, they wrote letters and messages for me to send to their families. It felt like they had been kidnapped. You were kidnapped. Thrown into some sort of sick psychological experiment meant to strip us of every ounce of strength and dignity. Yes, that's exactly it. You were kidnapped and put through that. Correct. We were from different countries, spoke different languages, and practiced different religions. Yet in this place, none of that mattered. Everyone took care of each other. Everyone shared food. Everyone helped each other and held each other when someone broke down. Everyone fought to keep each other's hope alive. I got a message from Britt. My story had to blow up in the media. My story had started to blow up. And immediately after, I was told I was being released. My ICE agent, who had never spoken to me, told my lawyer I could have left sooner if I had signed a withdrawal form, and that they hadn't known I would pay for my own flight home. Just liars, eh? From the moment I arrived, I begged every officer I saw to let me pay for my own ticket. Not a single one of them spoke to me about my case. To put things into perspectives, I had a Canadian passport, lawyers, resources, medical, media attention, friends, family, and politicians advocating for me. Yet I was still detained for 2 weeks. Imagine what the system is like for every single person out there. A small group of us were transferred back to San Diego at 2 a.m., one last road trip, once again shackled in chains. I was then taken to the airport where 2 officers were waiting for me. The media was there, so the officers snuck me in through a side door, trying to avoid anyone seeing me in restraints. I was beyond grateful that, at the very least, I didn't have to walk through the airport in chains. To my surprise, the officers escorting me were incredibly kind and even funny. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. Keep your sense of humor, people. That's one thing you'll find. Guys like me have a very dark sense of humor, and it helps us in these dark times. And it's like, I'm at an accident scene, and I'm the first guy to crack a joke. I know I'm terrible that way, but it's like part of your coping mechanism. You got to keep that sense of humor, man, just like you got to keep your hope. I asked if I could put my shoelaces back on. Yes, one said, but you better not run. Yeah, the other added, or we'll tackle you in the airport. That'll really make the headlines. I laughed and told them I hadn't spent a lot of time observing the guards during my detention. I had spent a lot of time observing them and couldn't believe how often I saw humans treating other humans with such disregard. Don't worry, I joked. You two get 5 stars. That's just the good cop, bad cop thing. You know, it's those guys, if they were in that posting, they'd be the same, right? When I finally landed in Canada, my mom and 2 best friends were waiting for me. So was the media. I spoke to them, numb and delusional from exhaustion. It was surreal listening to my friends recount everything they had done to get me out, working with lawyers, reaching to the media, making endless calls to detention centers, desperately trying to get through to ICE or anyone who would help. They said the entire system felt rigged. It is, designed to make it nearly impossible for anyone to get out. It is. That's the truth of it. The reality became clear. ICE detention isn't a bureaucratic nightmare. It's a business. She's so right. These facilities are privately owned and run for profit. Companies like Core Civic and Geo Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. Core Civic made $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, Geo Group made more than $763 million from ICE contracts. Yeah, I guess you want to buy stock in them, I suppose. Oh, disgusting. The more detainees, the more money they make. It stands to reason that these companies have no incentive to release people quickly. Of course they don't. What I experienced was finally starting to make sense. It's all one big, twisted game. It's not just my story. It's a story of thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands soon, or if not already, trapped into a system that profits from their suffering. I'm writing in the hope that someone out there, someone with the power to change any of this, can do something. The strength I witnessed in those women, the love they gave their suffering, is what gives me faith. Faith that no matter how flawed the system and how cruel the circumstances, humanity will find a way to shine through. Even in the darkest places, within the most broken systems, humanity persists. Sometimes it reveals itself in the smallest, most unexpected acts of kindness, a shared meal, a whispered prayer, a hand reaching out in the dark. We are defined by the love we extend, by the courage we summon, and the truths we are willing to tell. You are awesome, Jasmine. I'm so glad you're home. Like I say, I was one of the first people to start speaking out because I completely knew exactly what was happening right away. I knew you were going to get fucked over, and I just hoped that enough noise could be made. And then I watched the interview. I forget which American broadcaster it was in the guy's name, but I watched it at the time and said, this is amazing, good. This is going to help her so much. But you speak the truth completely, and I'm proud of you for doing that. And I'm scared. I'm scared for Canadians who think it's just the same. It's business as usual. Let's just go to America. As you can tell, people who've done really nothing actually wrong, people who are not evil or criminal in any ways, are being treated with horrendous cruelty. Hit like, share, subscribe, and we'll keep speaking out the best we can for everybody we can with as much time as we got here on the channel every day. Thanks, everybody, for all your support. We'll see you next time. Bye now.